So looking at this verse, because my yoke is Christos in King James, I think William Tyndale, but the tradition was established, over 500 years ago, and nobody wants to go against it, and almost nobody will translate this rightly. So we're going to take a look. Usually somebody that doesn't know Greek, what they'll do is all they can do is they'll go, oh, I've got an app on my phone and I'll go look this word up. And whatever that lexicon or dictionary says, which is kind of like whatever a translation says, then, well, there you go. That's what it is, right? But we're going to go deeper than that. So let's take a look. Hello everyone, pantes. I think I'm going to start doing a new series. There's a few verses that I've just thought of here recently. These verses, yeah, they're not exactly translated quite right. So thought I'd start doing a series. So we'll start with one particular verse today, and then we'll look at others in the future. So someone might see, bad New Testament English translations. Oh, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, does he mean like these different versions of the English Bible? NIV, the Message, ESV, all these various ones. And is this going to be about which one is the best one? That's not what this video is about. Or do I mean, different English verses, different translations, of the Greek being translated in English? And is there something particularly wrong with the way they're translated? Yeah, that's what I mean. So if the King James renders a particular Greek passage a certain way, or NIV or ESV or Message or something, I think, wow, let's take a look at the evidence here. Is this a good translation? Now, I am not talking about, and this is something that people usually don't really think about, is many words in any language have multiple meanings. Right. So, yeah, lots of words have multiple meanings. So I'm not talking about that, because a lot of times, you could look at it as, well, it could be understood this way, it could be rendered this way, it could be translated this way, or it could be translated that way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying where sometimes a word never means what the English translation says, and yet for whatever reason, whether it's because of some sort of denominational bias, some sort of church history tradition, or some other factors that who knows why a particular verse is rendered a particular way, but it's just like that word never means that. And that's what this series is going to be about. So we're going to start out today with Matthew 11, verse 30. I got a series. I've only done part 1 so far, where it's, if you haven't seen this video, if you look up in the top right, you should be able to see the link for that. Watch this. I encourage you, watch this video first, and then go to that afterwards. But basically, part 1 is, looking at the history of our Bible. It would somewhat apply to non-Christians as well, with regard to the Old Testament. But since the New Testament is included with it, it's kind of specifically New Testament, Old Testament history for Christians and stuff. So part 1, you can see that. Part 2 will be coming up pretty soon. Okay, so Matthew chapter 11, verse 30. It's typically rendered something like, for my yoke is easy, or because my yoke is easy. Like gar, this postpositive right here. Postpositives never are the first word in a Greek sentence. They're never the first word. Usually the second word, could be the third word sometimes. Like gar, un, de, men. There's 4 of them, for instance. They're not. So it's really conveying the idea of because. So when we say for, in English, the word for can mean different things. So it's in the sense of because. So he just got done saying, something before this, where he's basically, telling his disciples to take the yoke upon them and learn from him, that he is gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, because my yoke is Christos, right? So we're going to talk about what's the right way to translate this. It is kind of difficult how to put it in English words, because there's a whole lot that you have to consider to say, okay, so how should we render this in English? But this is typical. The typical translation is, my yoke is easy. Many Bibles, I guess they're afraid because it's such a popular verse among Christians. Many, because I know Bible publishers, they want to sell Bibles. I mean, that's what they want to do. They're not trying to come out with a translation and then all of a sudden it just doesn't take off and sell a bunch of copies. They're going to go broke that way, or they're not going to make any money. And sadly, that's just the way business is run, and that takes precedence over spiritual things sometimes. But anyway, yeah. So looking at this verse, because my yoke is Christos, in King James, I think William Tyndale, but the tradition was established, over 500 years ago, and nobody wants to go against it, and almost nobody will translate this rightly. So we're going to take a look. Usually somebody that doesn't know Greek, what they'll do is, all they can do is they'll go, oh, I've got an app on my phone and I'll go look this word up. And whatever that lexicon or dictionary says, which is kind of like whatever a translation says, then well, there you go. That's what it is, right? But we're going to go deeper than that. So let's take a look. Let's understand the root of the Greek word, and I'll show you one technique that I've learned over the years to do that. I look basically at cognates of a particular word and get a feel for what the root is actually conveying. And so we're going to look at that, Christos, in order to understand what Jesus is saying here. So we're going to look at the general meaning of the root. Kind of has to do with the need or use, and we'll see that. So we'll start with one verb. We'll go down and look at some nouns, some adjectives, and let's just see. So here's a middle passive form of, I guess I don't have it on this page, but it's a alpha contract verb. So, there's three types of contract verbs: epsilon contract, omicron contract, and alpha contract. So middle passive form would be kraomai, would be in lexicon when it's uncontracted. When it becomes contracted in the first person, like this is shown, it would actually be kromai. So the alpha and the omicron contract, and they merge to become kromai. So just so you can see the, chi, rho, eta, sigma, or especially the eta. So you can see this. I just picked a couple forms that show that. So here's basically infinitive, and here's a middle passive third person aorist indicative. So, basically past tense. So you can see, the morphology doesn't always stay either alpha or omicron. In certain forms, it becomes eta, and that's kind of for us to kind of see the union between here, this adjective Christos, hogars dougos mu Christos. I just wanted to kind of show that. So it's the idea of to use or employ. That's kind of what you'll see in the Strongs or a lot of these, the LSJ or lexicons, to strongly employ something or someone, right? To make use of them, right? And then kre can sometimes we're going to see the idea of use and need, and kind of see the relationship there. So kre, here's a third person singular of the verb we're going to see here in a second, krao. So the active form of this is the middle passive form, but just kra, alpha, kra o, and then when it contracts, it just be kro, su kras, ego kro, su kras, autos kra. And the active form is not used very much, but the third person singular active form is used in an impersonal way, like a lot of third person impersonal verbs are used. In this case, it's kind of like, usually the construction is, this third person singular form, kre, and then, usually the accusative form of, maybe like, for instance, if I say, talk about myself, of ego, I, and this is basically me. So it's basically the accusative form of that. So it's basically, I need. I know it seems kind of strange, but it needs to me, or it needs me to do. And that's really strange English, but I need to do something is basically what that is. So it's the idea of need, or it would be useful for me to do something. Basically, you can think of it like that. I need to do something, or it's useful for me to do something. And then here's a noun, to crema. So this is a neuter form. To crema is something that one needs or uses. Emphasis on that. Like goods or property or money. I mean, this is something right out of, let's see, Strong's or LSJ. This kind of language, something that one needs or uses. Goods, property, money. I think that was in the Strong's lexicon. And then sometimes eta in Greek is kind of back and forth with this diphthong, epsilon, iota. Sometimes on some manuscripts where the word is actually supposed to be eta, somebody actually, for whatever reason, maybe one scribe was dictating and they were, basically reading the text, and then he was writing it and he made a spelling error, and it's actually written as epsilon iota. Sometimes you'll see that. So that's one way you know that they were pronounced similarly at the period of time that the manuscript was written. So anyway, all that to say that sometimes a little back and forth between epsilon iota and eta, and there's other examples of when that is, but this is related. So crea, so this noun right here, he crea, the need or necessity, or sometimes used in a sense of business, of transacting business. So again, keeping this in mind. I even tossed this in, something that's lacking or in need of use is kind of the idea. That's where we're going with the root of this verb. So here's the middle passive form. I guess we looked at that already. So just to connect that together with this one, I wanted to keep that in there. And actually on this previous slide, I guess I didn't show these here. I guess that's why I'm doing it. Yeah, right. So we're going to look at the active form of this verb. This is the middle passive we looked at already. And that's krao. We'll look at that down here. There's one verse in the Bible that uses it that way with the active voice. But here's two lexicons, two popular lexicons, especially middle. Liddell is really good. Strong's, this is used around a lot of people that are studying the Bible, use that a lot. And so they're conveying, because there's only one verse, and it seems like the context conveys this idea to lend, right? So they translate it as that. In other words, what is lacking or what is in need of by someone else, for somebody to actually give it to them. And we'll see as we go. That's why sometimes this root idea is conveyed, the idea of being kind. Because what someone needs or what is lacking, sometimes the context of how it's used, a particular form of one particular cognate of that root conveys the idea of somebody supplying what is needed. So therefore, it's either thought of as lending, or in one sense, it's thought of as being kind. So anyway, if we look for the same verb, kromai or kraomai, and we look at the active voice, this is again, kromai, kraomai is middle passive, but this is active voice. So the one verse that's in the Bible, that's in the New Testament, I should say, in the New Testament, is Luke 11, verse 5. Kai epen prosautus, tis ex humon hexe, so the future form of echo, he has, this is he will have, right? So who out of you guys will have a friend? Hexe philon. Kai poreosetai, ho philos poreosetai. The friend proceeds towards him, or journeys towards him, or travels towards him. Prosauton, towards him. Prepositional phrase. Mesonuktiu. So here's mesonuktion. So mesonuktion is midnight. So here's the genitive form of that, singular, of course. Kai epiauto. So here's basically Lego, I say, but the aorist form is epsilon iota p. That's the root for the aorist. That's the aorist root. And then we've got this, this ending here that is subjunctive, and it's basically the singular, third person singular. So in other words, he or she or it, third person singular. So we're talking about this person, has a friend, and this friend says to him, epe auto, phile. This is what he's saying. Phile in the vocative, right? Philos in the vocative. Phile, kreson moi tres artus. Kreson moi tres artus. Okay, so it's like this verb, krao, to me, 3 loaves of bread. So artos, ho artos is bread. So we could think of that as 1 loaf of bread. And then if we make it plural like we have it here, where there's 3, you could think of it as like 3 loaves of bread. It could be 3 slices of bread, but I don't really think so. I think we'd have a word, involved where it's talking about it being cut. And so this is, usually thought of as 3 loaves of bread. So it's this idea of what is in need of, what could be useful, what is lacking. And so he's like, make yourself useful to me, basically, by giving me 3 loaves of bread, is that idea. So Middle Little's Greek lexicon defines it this way. And I think it's much better than this. Like, you can zoom out like an aerial view and just kind of get the idea of what this is saying. And you could come to a conclusion, rough ideas that is lending to me 3. And so a lot of translations translate it that way. But if we want to like see the root meaning, that's the whole goal of looking at all these variations of this root, the different cognates of this root, is to see it's to furnish, is what these guys say, to furnish what is needful, right? Need, use, lacking. So what is lacking and what is needed. So it's like, furnish to me, what is needful. And that is 3 loaves of bread. That's the idea. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so again, here's our, keeping in mind our verse, and here's where we're going with the, proposed root meaning. So here says data type omega verb. So usually it's data omega type verbs. If you compare it to the regular omega verb, and then you have as data form of it, usually it's kind of a causative sort of thing. Doesn't seem so much in this one, but that's just in general. I'll mention that. So χρηστός. So we were just looking at, these up here, these verbs, krao, that in this particular form in the aorist, with the imperative. I didn't mention that. It's an imperative form, singular. Χρήσομοι. So here we have, from this verb here, actually, it could be this one, but it could also be this one, because when you go to the aorist, this data turns into a sigma. So it could be this one, to have, lack, need, or want. So yeah, that kind of wouldn't make sense though, would it? Yeah. So, need to me or lack to me, or kind of that idea, or cause to need or cause to lack, and actually cause to not be in need or cause not to be lacking or whatever. So yeah, that's probably the way that they say that it's actually this one. Yeah, it would seem so. But anyway, real close idea anyway. So it's about solving this problem. Χρηστός, right? In this particular form, it's about solving that problem. But we're seeing that we're examining the root to get the root idea. So when we approach the specific word, which is this adjective down there, we can, get more of an idea. So let's notice the relationship between being needful and useful, right? Somebody is solving this lack, this need. Solving this, they become useful. You see how they're kind of like, antonyms of each other. They're kind of, kind of juxtaposed to each other. So when somebody's in need and somebody provides what is needed, then they become useful to them. So it's kind of like the root kind of carries that. And depending on which angle it's coming from, it's either going to convey this idea or this idea, that the need was solved and provided for, and they, therefore the idea of use or useful, or the need is still there and it's still the lacking of it, and kind of idea. So χρηστός is in the lexicons a lot of times saying that it's useful, gentle, pleasant, kind. That's what the LSJ says. So why would such a one be kind? So this idea of kind, right? I kind of hit that already, but let's say it again. Because he is supplying what is needful, what is lacking, right? So it's, up here to furnish what is needful, right? So this is the adjective. This is what's actually used in this passage, χρηστός, right? So, for my yoke is useful or kind. My yoke is useful. So let's look at some more evidence to see if that idea is kind of really correct. So here's an adjective. It's not just χρηστός, but χρηστοτης, right? That's this one. Hey, χρηστοτης. Oh, sorry, I said adjective. It's actually a noun. I should have said noun. Sorry. So this noun that kind of shares the same, real similar to Christos, this adjective. So Christotes, hey Christotes, goodness, excellence, uprightness is kind of the way it says in Strong's. The reason why we see the context suggesting goodness or excellence or use or uprightness is that the noun is someone that is useful or providing what is needed to those that have this need, right? So Okay, here's where we left off. Okay, so what does it seem to say Jesus is trying to convey to his students, his disciples, right? Well, let's consider these verses, right? This is just things that Jesus said, and even John and Peter, things that were said, right? About how disciples, how followers of Jesus, how believers in Jesus are supposed to behave. So first thing is, here's what Jesus said, right? In another place, the rabbi, oftentimes they call him rabbi, or in Greek, didaskalos, teacher, he told his students that it is sufficient, or it's sufficient, for his students to become just like him, right? That's what he says, Matthew 10, verse 25. It's enough for a disciple to be like his teacher and a student like his master. So if he's putting a yoke on himself and his student, right? Because he's telling us to take that yoke upon him. That's what he says. We're looking at Matthew 11, verse 30. But if we look at verse 29, that's what he's doing. He's telling him to put this on, in verse 29, put this yoke upon you, right? And learn from me, he says, and learn from me. For I am gentle, or some translation might say meek, and humble, or literally, I am lowly, figuratively meaning humble, of heart, in heart, and then he says this, Christos ἐστιν. That's where he makes this statement, right? And so by telling us to take on that yoke, now if we consider two oxen in a field, in a farmer, in ancient times, right? One oxen, typically, either both of them were very well seasoned in what they've been doing. They're experts at plowing the field. Or quite often, if there's a young oxen, they're not going to put two young oxen together, and then the farmer is fighting with them to try to get them to get a clue what to be doing to plow the field. No, they would put one very well established, very well seasoned, very well learned and trained ox together with another, with a rookie ox, a student ox, right? And put that yoke upon them. And then now that's going to train this newbie, how to plow this field. And that's what Jesus is saying. These are people that are farmers. They understand this, and so that's what he's saying. And by doing this, it's enough for a disciple to be like his teacher, because you become like the other good oxen. The good oxen is going to draw the clueless oxen to plow the field. And so that's the idea. And so we see in 1 John 2, verse 5, he's telling his readers of the letter that he wrote to them, say, by this we know that we are in Christ, we are in him. He who says he abides or remains, in him, has an obligation to walk just as Jesus walked, right? So that's 1 John 2, verse 5 and 6. We ought to walk as, that ought is oftentimes not realized that the Greek word means it has obligation to walk. Obligation to walk as Jesus walked. 1 Peter 2, verse 21, Peter's saying the same thing. It's enough for a disciple to be like his teacher, and we have an obligation to walk as Jesus walked. He says the same thing. For this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us. And then he's getting ready to quote part down here. I don't have it included here. It's in the next verse, where he quotes Isaiah 53, verse 9. But he's saying, he's referring to the suffering that he did in Isaiah 53. I think we all know that passage. Suffered for us, leaving an example that you should follow his steps. Leave an example that you should follow his steps. An example that you should follow his steps, right? Student, teacher. Yoke for two oxen. One of them is the teacher. One of them is the student. And we have an obligation to walk just as Jesus walked, because if we decide, it's up to us whether we want to actually be his disciple or not. If we take that yoke upon us, we are his disciple. And we follow along with him, and we learn from him, right? For he's gentle and humble at heart. We follow in his steps. We walk just as he walked. Okay, last bullet point. Jesus said, whoever tries to save his life, his soul, literally, psyche, will lose it. But whoever loses his life for the sake of Jesus will find it. That's what Jesus said. This is the yoke. Jesus said, it is light. That last part of the verse, totally fine. But it makes us useful to God. That's the point. That's the whole point of Jesus' statement. He wants us to be useful to God. Formerly, we were not useful to God. And then we repented and we turned from not being useful to God. And we become his disciples, and we start doing what he says. And we walk as he walked, and we follow in his steps. And it's enough for us to be like our, as a servant, and we need to be servants, not just students. Be like our master and like our teacher, right? And then Matthew 11:29. So yeah, so Matthew 11:30 is what we're looking at, but here's the verse before. Jesus tells his students to put his yoke upon themselves. By putting that yoke on, they are commanded to learn from Jesus that he is gentle or meek and lowly and humble in heart. And the student that does this will find rest for his soul. If he does this, he will find rest for his soul, right? There's a contingency there. If you don't do that, you're not going to find the rest for your soul, right? So Matthew 11, because my yoke is Christos and my burden, the weight that you're carrying, is light. It's not heavy, right? So he's saying this, whoever tries to save his life will lose it. Sounds pretty heavy, I think, to our flesh. But Jesus is saying, no, follow me. My yoke is Christos. So he's going to teach us to be useful to God. Okay, right here. Right here, Christos. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Mouse. There we go. So here we go. So Christos, Christe is the feminine, Christon is the neuter. So here's what we got, Matthew 11, verse 30. So we're already looking at that verse. Let's look at this, Luke 5, verse 39. So let's look at that. Let's put the interlinear on. Okay, udes bion. So no one drinking. No one drinking. Palaion. So palaios is an adjective. It kind of looks like it's being used substantively here. In other words, being used as a noun. So palaios. And so that basically means something that's like old, like could be ancient, but definitely old. So no one drinking something that is old. Thele neon. So once, the new, right? Legge ho palaios, Christos ἐστιν, right? So it's the old, Christos, is useful. The old provides what is needful, basically. Christos. The old, you wouldn't say the old is kind. I mean, it's the same adjective we're talking about, Christos, which a lot of people argue that it means kind, but that doesn't make sense. The old is kind, but it's the old provides what is needed. That's basically the argument. So it doesn't mean better, because in Greek, most people that just learn English, native language, they've never learned another language before, don't really think about what maybe they had been taught in school, and that is you have an adjective, and then you have what's called a comparative. Like the adjective would be good, as an example, typical example, and then better, because it's comparatively or relatively, compared to another one, it's relatively better, right? And then best, right? So again, it's also a comparative sort of thing, but they call those superlatives. So we've got typically the adjective is called the positive. So the adjective or the positive, and then the comparative, and then we have the superlative. Now this is not a comparative. So to say that it's better, because if it's some sort of relative comparative sort of adjective, because pretty much all adjectives in Greek, a lot of them or most of them, I would think, I know quite a few, but I don't know all of them. There's a whole lot in the Greek language. But yeah, you have the adjective, and then you'd have the comparative version of it, and you would have the superlative version of it. So you have basically, to use the example, good, better, best version, right? 3 versions. So this is just an adjective. This is a positive. This is not a comparative. So it's not saying that it's better. It's saying that it provides what is useful, what is needed. So that's basically the argument with this verse. Okay. And so let's go look at another one. So that's Luke 5, verse 31. Luke 6, verse 35. I guess I had that one already. So here it is in English. So ESV, King James, but love your enemies. This is Jesus speaking in Luke chapter 6. Love your enemies, do good and lend to them. So this is actually danizo. This actually means lend. Expecting nothing in return, and your reward, homistos, will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, right? For he is kind. Here we go. They're using this word translated as kind. Let's see why he's kind. Because he's providing what is needful, what is useful to both the ungrateful and to the evil person. So they just translate it as kind, but it's the idea. This, basically he's Christos to both the ungrateful and the evil. So he provides what is useful and what is needful to both the ungrateful and the evil. And so we can look at it in Greek here. The interlinear. Yeah. So plain agapate, τους εχθρούς χουμών και αγαθοποίητε και δανείζετε μέδεν απελεπίστοντες και έσται ο μισθός χουμών πολλούς και έσεσθε χουίοι χουψίστου, genitive, χουψίστου, χουίοι χουψίστου, ότι αυτός Χριστός ἐστιν, επί τους ακαρίστους και πονερούς. So the evil and so here we've got basically, basically it comes from charis, and then you put the alpha in front of it, so charis, sometimes it can mean grace, sometimes it means gratitude, as in, thanks. But you put an alpha in front of it, and it's the equivalent in English of like going from successful to unsuccessful, or important to unimportant. You make it the antonym, you make it the opposite of what that is. So that's why it's akaristus. So the ungrateful and the evil. So Christos, because he provides what is needful to both the grateful and the evil. And that's the argument that Jesus is using here about loving your enemies and do good to them. Be useful to them. Be like this. Be like your father. And that's what he says. He actually says, talks that way. So about imitating God. And that's a big point of this passage right here. Yeah, here we go. So that was Luke 6, verse 35. So we looked at these two. And, of course, that's the one we're looking at. Matthew 11, verse 30. But here's Paul making an argument, Romans 2, verse 4. And let's see, let's go to interlinear. So here, I guess that pusios is an adjective, but the sigma turned into a tau. Plutos, ho Plutos is a noun. So, like the richness or the wealth, So he's talking about, the richness or the wealth of this Christotes is the adjective. Hey Christotes. So it's a noun. I think I had it in my presentation. I said it was an adjective. That was a mistake. Christotes, hey Christotes. So we already looked at it. Goodness, excellence, uprightness. And so the reason why it's thought of that way, particularly in this verse, the richness of this is the argument is like all this, what he provides, what is needed, what is useful. And even here, so here, to Christon, to Theou, basically, here's where he's basically saying this, and he says, here's why, right? Because hoti, to Christon, to Theou, the kindness of God, and to leads you into repentance, basically. So, the usefulness of God, or the providing what is needful, so that so you won't be condemned, so the kindness of God leading into repentance, to Christon, right? So it shares the same root, and that's the idea here, the richness of this, provision of providing what is needed and useful. It goes on from there. We can let's go ahead and see how the ESV renders it. That was verse 4. Okay, that's right. Verse 4. And so, or do you presume in the richness of his kindness? So here's how they're translating his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness, to Christon, is meant to lead you to repentance. So, the usefulness and the providing what is needed, providing what is lacking, what is lacking, what is needful, makes God useful. So it's still the same root idea of both these that are being translated as kindness. So when somebody is kind, it's because they're providing what is needed. And so that's the idea of this root, right? Okay. Okay, so yeah, we've looked at a few. You can come look at more if you like. I'll try to remember to put this link in the yeah. So here, yeah, same idea with Peter. You tasted the kindness of God, or His provision and Him, providing what is needed and what is lacking. Here's where He's saying, "Be kind to one another, provide what is needed for one another." Even here, this participle form of charisto or charistomai actually is the verb in the middle passive form. Here's the participle form of charistomai. It shares the root with charis, which is, like I said, either gratitude, thanks, or grace, right? So this kindness or grace, and it's about being graceful and kind to one another. They usually will translate it as forgiving, but it's used quite a bit. We'll look at that some other time. I don't necessarily think that's a bad translation, but yeah, just to get a broader understanding of what's going on there. But it's in conjunction or connection with this idea of, here, plural, nominative, masculine, Christoi, basically talking about the people he's talking to, telling them to be useful and provide what is needed. And even this, splaknizomai, this root, from that verb I just mentioned, this is a noun from that, together with au on the front, which means good, and it kind of intensifies, making it more good. And so splagnizo all by itself, even though literally it has to do with your bowels, or whatever, your guts or something, whatever, like people wrenching their guts to do good to somebody. It has this figurative meaning almost, I think, every time, of the idea of compassion and mercy and stuff like that. So this has got au on the front of it, making it even more compassionate and merciful, right? So being useful and providing, being compassionate, merciful, and being graceful to one another, like this is the idea. And they just simply translate as be kind to one another. There's definitely a whole lot more wrapped up into these three words in this compassion and mercy and providing what is needed than what this simply conveys. It's much more intense than that. So anyway, we're going to stop there with the example passages. Let's get back. Okay, then, and finally, let's actually go take a look at the lexicons in here. So yeah, here's where we go. We got our verse here, right? We got this guy here, and yeah, let's see. I guess I can get rid of that. Yeah, go back to the mouse. And so let me click on this guy, and we can see, like, the summary here, Christos, Christe, Christon, all adjectives always have masculine, feminine. Well, sometimes masculine and feminine is in one. In other words, there's the type 2 and the type 3, where there's 3, masculine, feminine are separate. But anyway, so we see the summary is serviceable or good. Serviceable as in providing what is needful, right? Or as the one we saw that said that it was... I forget the kind of language it used, but basically providing what was needful. So yeah, useful, gentle, pleasant, kind. Again, look at what they had here, going with the typical translation. You can see, like, it never... We looked at most of these instances in the New Testament. There's 7 of them, right? And except for this one, they never render it easy, right? It's crazy. And so, yeah, if we go look at the LSJ, so LSJ, Little, Smith, and Jones, I think, LSJ, really super useful and just very well respected lexicon. Here's some here in some different languages. Middle Liddell, this is English, but we can see, yeah, benefits, kindness, this idea, like we're looking at, useful, good of its kind, serviceable, is how they're showing it. But you don't ever see it, any kind of like easy, unless you've got that one passage, Matthew 11 verse 30, and then because of tradition that goes way back, you might see somebody render it that way. But it's not because of it, organically or from the bottom up. Like, here's what it means. It's like they did that way back then, and so now people just want to sometimes hold to it based on tradition, and it's crazy. But yeah, you don't see easy anywhere. Like Middle Liddell, LSJ, these are very well respected. Yeah, So there you go. We'll just look at those, and then Strong's. And like I said, I mean, nobody renders it that way. This is the only verse. Okay, now if we were trying to convey the idea of easy, what would be a word that we would use? Now the comparative, we had already talked about the positive or the adjective, which that's what this is, eukopos, right? So that's the adjective. It means easy. Yeah, it means easy, labor, or easy, not difficult. But it's not in the New Testament, but in the New Testament, the comparative form of this, eukopoteron, eukopoteros, that is in the New Testament, the comparative form. So easier, that's in there, but eukopos is not in there. But if Jesus wanted to say that, he could say hogar zugos amu eukopos estin, eukopos kaito fortion. This is the last part of that verse. To fortion, my burden, or the thing that I'm carrying, or the thing that somebody is carrying. To fortion, it comes from phero. It's the verb. It kind of shares that root. Sometimes when you go to the noun, sometimes the epsilon changes into an omicron. So to fortion mu elafron. So it's light, it's not heavy, ἐστιν, right? So if he wanted to say that, that would be one way he could say it. Another way, with this root is in the New Testament, but this particular adjective is not in the New Testament either. But versions of this using this root is in the New Testament. It conveys the idea of easy. So either eukopos or radios would be two ways. He could have said hogaris tugos mu radios ἐστιν. If that's what he meant, he could have. Or he could have said eukopos. So anyway, I'm going to end it here. God bless y'all. Hopefully this all helped y'all. And leave comments. Let me know what you think. Okay, talk to you later. Again, I'm doing a series on this, so this is the first, and we'll make a playlist and have a series of these verses where we can see in the New Testament. It's like, wow, it doesn't really mean that. Let's talk about a better way to render the verse.